Thanks for being here today. So this webinar is organized in the framework of LIVESEEDING project. And today we will speak about cultivar evaluation or cultivar testing and present the main outcomes of the previous EU project LIVESEED on this issue. And next week, on Thursday, 26th morning, we will have a LIVESEEDING workshop aiming to clarify who will do what in task 2.3 on this cultivar evaluation issue. So the purpose of today's webinar is to share LIVESEED knowledge in order to have all the same level of information before we start and try to implement it in LIVESEEDING. So my name is Frédéric Rey, and I will present today with Ambrogio Costanzo, and we are both working at ITAB, the Organic Food and Farming Institute in France. So we'll start with a presentation that will last about 40 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A, a discussion together, and we will stop the recording for the discussion so you can speak freely and ask any question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start. Oh, it doesn't okay, so how to set up and optimize cultivar evaluation network for organic. That was the central question we addressed in LIVESEED. And by cultivar, we considered varieties, breeding lines, land races, and populations. So this presentation will be divided in 4 parts, and then the part number 5 will be the discussion together. So first we will address the problem. What is cultivar testing in organic agriculture? What are the bottlenecks and limits? Then we will look at the possible solution and opportunities in part 2, to consider also how to make it works in part 3. And then we will have some time to prepare the workshop next week. So the problem. So according to the farming system and environment, the farming system and environment are conditioning farmers' choice for the varieties they will sow. And for this, they require information. And well-organized cultivar testing network should be able to provide this useful information to farmers so that they can sow the best adapted cultivars. And adapted cultivars are the key elements to boost the farm productivity, yield stability, the end product quality, and eventually the farm income. By cultivar testing networks, we are considering here breeding, post-registration, and informal networks, but not the registration, the official testing for variety registration. Ambro?
Yes, so of course this is a figure that we already saw sometimes. It's just an idea of why cultivar testing, cultivar evaluation is important. So can you go on, Fred? If you think that for organic agriculture, of course, we know that adapted cultivars are essential, as Fred said. So you can either have adapted cultivar from conventional breeding. You can have breeding dedicated to organic farming. You can have breeding within organic farming systems. So you can have very advanced breeding, which is very good. And part of the LIVESEEDING project is adopting this strategy. But it's important to complement this strategy with having a good cultivar testing system, because ultimately, if you don't have the information to allocate the right cultivar to the right farm, this will always limit the level of crop performance. So you have fantastic cultivars, but if you don't know which is the one adapted to your farm, basically the crop performance will always be limited. So this is what is conventionally being done. So of course, we are also trying to see what the system looks like now. In general, you have a very linear pipeline from research to the value chain. So the research is very simplified, of course, generates diversity, the breeders select, the authorities do the registration trials. What we say, the agricultural knowledge and information system is in charge of the cultivar recommendation, what are known as the recommended list, or giving varietal recommendation. The farmers just use the information and use the varieties, and then the value chain uses post-farm. And here we have also a detail on how complicated it can be. So you have the DHS and VCU test. So these are done by the authorities that actually allows varieties to be marketed as seed. Then these varieties go to the cultivar trial networks post-registration, which are mostly made by analytic trials, so the microplot trials for cereals and everything. This generates cultivar recommendation, and then the farmers at the end uses the information. And of course, this information flow apparently is simple because it's a pipeline, but in reality, we all know that it's extremely heavy in logistics, time, infrastructure, and ultimately very high cost. So trying to do the logics of the problem. So we know that cultivar information is generally obtained conventionally, but we also know that cultivar performance in organic is different than in conventional systems, so it's not adapted. So the solution, the first solution we might have in mind could be why don't we just reproduce the conventional trials, just put the same plot trial in an organic system? But we have another problem, that organic agriculture is much more diversified than conventional agriculture is, just because you have no input. So the differences between environments are much more marked. So the question would be, maybe organic cultivar testing needs more trials than the conventional cultivar testing. But again, this is a dead end, because we also know two things. The first is that when you test things in experimental plots, they can give you different results than they will give you in farmers' fields. And also we know that trials are very expensive, and the funding for organic farming is very small. So the only hints, the only way to go is to invent completely new models for organic farming based on two concepts: the concept of participation and decentralization, which gives us the concept of distributed work, and the concept of frugality. So from a pipeline, as we see, we need to think about more like an ecosystem where breeders, research farmers, authorities, the value chain, the knowledge and information system, they all interact with one another. There is not a first one and a last one. And also just to reflect on what is centralized, like the first figure, this is a very old, important paper on innovation. What is decentralized, where you have different small centers, and what is ultimately distributed, where everything is interconnected and you really have a web. So this is just the ideal visualization of what we are trying to put together.
So just here to mention that in LiveSeed, to think on these new models, we mobilize the concept of frugality, and for instance, the frugal innovation concept. In short, the idea is to make it simple, or as far as possible, and also to first define the objectives, and also to be very clear about your constraints. And you can only find a solution when the objective and constraints are really well defined. So in this first part, if we want to try to sum up, farmers need information on cultivars. Organic food and farming systems are diversified. There are many crops, many contexts and situations. At the same time, cultivar testing is expensive, and there are only few funding resources available. So at the end of the day, there are only few cultivar testing networks for organic in Europe, and only for major crops. And when they are organized on farm, they are often requiring heavy logistic, with data return slow and low, while the impact is most of the time not very high. So that was the problem. Now let's look at the solutions.
So we tried to start the solution with 3 possible approaches that we have. Of course, when we think about variety trials, we generally think only of the analytic trials, where if you can go, you have the classic randomized block design, basically, that is done. It can be done either on a research station or on a farmer's field. But generally, a lot of people say, you know, this trial has been done on farm. But if actually the farmer is just giving you a surface for you to go with, for you or for someone to go with their plot driller and take their data, this is not, it is still an analytic trial. It's because the key thing is that it's managed by technicians. With standard experimental design, which provide indeed objective, standardized recommendation. If you think of wheat, they give you the protein, the yield, and whatever is just standardized so that everyone basically agrees. But ultimately, you can discover that actually nobody agrees. They are appropriate for what we say the long supply chain. So if you are a farmer who wants to start and grow wheat, don't really necessarily have his own market and everything, this is probably the place where you go and find cultivar information. So it provides, in a way, high precision. It can indeed test a high number of cultivars. As a minus, it still can have a high cost, and also how representative of real condition can it really be? If we go, we also have another approach. We call it the decentralized participatory trials. This is generally done on farmers' field. The big difference is that it is managed by farmers and technicians. Does need a central coordination. It can be small plots, like a normal classic trials, or also big plot, kind of a field divided into different strips. With flexible experimental design, can provide recommendations that generally are appropriate for the short supply chain. Its minuses are that you have a moderate precisions. A variable number of cultivars can be tested, generally depending on the number of sites that you can have. But as a plus, you have a moderate cost, and especially it is very representative of real conditions. In some of the examples we know of this approach, the fields were actually the commercial fields of the farmer. So the products that is measured is the product that they grow and sell. So it's actually a real world evidence. There is also a third approach, which we call the participatory observation, that generally is not formalized, but it is not added value to, but it happens very often anyway. The experimental field can be the farmer's field, the consumer's plate, the marketplace, everything. It can be managed by the users and by the technicians, where users are farmers, consumers, citizens, bakers, millers, directly, so on the production field or on the transformation place. Can provide multiple types of recommendations. It does need a central data collection digital platform, and its strength is in the high number of observations that can be allowed. So the minus are that generally you have low quantitative precision. You can have a variable number of cultivars that you can test. This plus is this way you can add value if you have a high number of observations to quite precious qualitative informations. So things that are not necessarily measurable. It's very low cost and very representative of real conditions. We can go on.
Yeah, I think.
There are also, there are not the only, there are, let's say, 3 extremes of a triangle, but you can indeed have hybrid approaches. There you have a whole range of approaches that you can use. For example, if you think about positioning between the analytic trial and the decentralized participatory trials, we have tools already studied and validated in the LIVESEED project with, for example, the booklet that has been translated also in many languages on how to select the appropriate methodology for on-farm cultivar trials.
Yeah, just this booklet is, that one in particular is only in English, but the other one is in several languages I will present later. But Yeah, we wanted to highlight this booklet because it provides decision trees. And here you have an example following the frugal strategy I mentioned earlier about your constraints. Here, the first question you have is how many locations do you have in your network? If you have few locations, if you have medium, for example, 20 locations, or if you have a lot of places like 100. Then it depends also how many varieties you would like to test in your network. And depending on this, you have several options that are described here as experimental design. It describes also the measures and protocols, and it proposes also several related statistical models and references. Here you have also, so all these are screenshots from the booklets. It illustrates also for this method the kind of results you can get. So here for the triadic model, here for the Bayesian models. It gives some information and also it discusses the pros and cons of each of them. So we don't have time today to present all of them, but just to tell you, you have in these different booklets some very useful tool. We recommend you to read if you want to try to switch, to shift from analytical trials to more decentralized and participatory. So that was the first things we would like to highlight. The second one, most of you heard the presentation of Seedlinked from Nico, for instance, Nicolas Albert. So I will just say a few words because yes, you may already heard of it. So this is a mobile app, or you can visit it on your internet browser. So here I'm on the search page, so you can select search for different crops. You have, and if you click, for example, here on one variety, for each variety, you have pictures, you have a description, and you have some reviews, so some rates on different parameters by users. And so this is one of the possibility of the interesting things of the tool. But the second one is here on the top menu called trials. So once you're connected as a trial manager, this is what I did here. You can, through this tool, manage your own variety trials. So the first step is to provide some basic information. Then you have here the page where you can select the trial type you would like to implement. So if it's a full set where all participants test all varieties, or if they test a small subset of all varieties, if you want to organize a tasting trial, or if you want to organize a trial on a single site where participants can vote, for example, when they visit the field and you show different crops or different varieties. So you select your travel type, then you can invite the different participants, you put their emails and contact, then you can add the varieties you would like to add in your trials. And also here is the step number 4 on the different traits. So for each crops, you have several traits that are proposed, and you click the one you would like your participants to assess. And then when it's finalized, in the end, you can directly send an invitation to the participants to participate to the trial, or you can generate, like here, a QR code. For example, if you organize the tasting, last time we tried with tomatoes. So here is a screenshot of my smartphone where you can put some rates on different parameters. And once you have validated your rating, everybody can have in live directly share the results and have a look at the results. So here's when we tasted the different apples at the workshop in December. So here, that was just 2 examples on if you want to switch from here to here, or if you want to to implement some participatory observation, very concrete tools that are already available and that you can implement. Now, Ambrogio will give you some other examples.
Yes, for example, a concrete example of what a hybrid solution number one could be is, for example, when you have a few small plot trials and a network of farms who actually test the same cultivars or species, if you wish, that are tested in the small plot trials. In this case, the plot trial, it doesn't need to be 20 or 30 plot trials, it can be 2 or 3, can give you a high precision on traits. For example, they compare all the varieties at the same place. They can see exactly which is the earliest or the latest variety, whereas the farm network can actually focus freely and selecting a small subset of varieties, as we were saying earlier, in each of their farm and give you the real performance. This is an evolution of what was called the mother-baby trial approach, and is appropriate, for example, for arable crops. In arable crops, decision-making is hungry of quantitative data. You need to measure things. For example, competitiveness against weeds, as you can see in a picture that came from our previous experience in the UK, is something that is very important in organic cereal growing, and you can only see if you go in real fields. You cannot have a picture like that in a small plot trials. And next, if you go on a hybrid model on the other side, you have an experiment that has been done, a real case that has been done in Nicaragua, where actually the participatory observation with an app and a central platform was implemented on a decentralized participatory design, which is called the triadic design, when you have a small number of cultivars and a high number of places. And actually, this has produced results and has been applied to bean variety testing in Nicaragua directly with farmers with a very, very low cost, as you can see. Okay. So to go on, this is where we go from here, and trying to speak about what the scope of task 2.3 might be. I making just 2 examples we know. So one is the example of organic wheat in the UK that has been going on from 5 years now, and is now been has reached a stage where it's not necessarily going to be a case study, but this is to give the idea. What we are talking is about the trajectory that each one of us implementing a case study wants to see for their case study. So, for example, in our case, in the case of the organic wheat in the UK, the point 0 5 years ago was there was no organic cultivar testing at all. The point 1 was that some analytic trials were done by the Organic Research Center, and some farmers were testing some varieties at a field scale. The next step was that currently, so last year, there were more than 25 farms and more than 25 cultivars tested, with unique results on weed suppressiveness, nitrogen use efficiency, resilience and stability, and also on the agronomy of wheat, plus the scientific publications and many learnings that we made, so not only on varieties, but also on cropping systems. And next could be that apply the method that has been very successful to other challenging crops, and also facilitate farmers' data collection, so expand and make it easier. So the trajectory that we imagine is, in this case, is going from a hybrid between analytic and decentralized to be more decentralized and participatory, and perhaps going towards participatory observation, so that the research team doesn't have to be in charge of every single farm and travel the country all the time that is needed. A second example is from France. So you have basically 2 case studies with 3 potential case studies. Analytical cultivar testing for cereal, which is in place and works very well for wheat, but not for the crops. Analytical cultivar testing for vegetables that is in place, but with a very difficult data flow. And a good collection of local participatory experiences that are in place and successful, but very local. So the desired future is, what if we coordinate and learn from one another of all these methods? and we can actually harness a huge number of crops and power networks, and also free up the experimental station that are busy with cultivar trials so that they can actually implement some participatory plant breeding where they are more needed. So the trajectory here would be to join up the approaches 1 and 2 and move them towards the approach number 3. So the take-home, okay?
Go ahead, Bombo, if you want.
The take-home message here is that we do have tools available, and that several hybrid approaches are possible, and we have the opportunities with live seeding task 2.3 to put them in place if they are not in place, to improve them if they are already in place, and to create something that is alive and working once the project is finished. So now we have to see how to make it all work concretely.
Yeah, and for that, here is the second booklet. So it looks like the same as the other one, but that one called Guidelines for Organic On-Farm Cultivar Trials is available in several languages. And it shows that what we just presented right now regarding experimental design and also to some extent data collection is only 2 aspects of the 4 main dimensions to consider if you want to develop or improve cultivar testing networks. And one of the key issues is network facilitation. The other important issue is the business model. If you want your network to sustain over time, it is very important to think about how to finance it and to make it sustainable. So in this booklet, following here again the frugal innovation strategy, define objective, identify your constraint, and apply an appropriate methodology. We describe here for all the 4 different dimensions how this methodology can be applied. For example, if you look at the business models, as I said, one of the general objectives might be the viability in the long term, but you have some constraints like labor cost, fixed cost, and the different methods that you can consider. And I'll present it here very quickly, but it is described in more details in the booklet. It can be through public support, it can be through user subscription models, through value chain collaboration, or some hybrid models combining these different approaches. And if now you are convinced you would like to download this booklet, you can find them on LiveSeed website on top menu, tools for practitioners. And here they are, the 2 ones. So the last one I just presented, available in Romanian, Spanish, Dutch, French, Italian, and Portuguese. And the one with the decision trees is the one only available in English, and they are here. So to sum up here, the experimental design and statistical methods are very important, but only one of the 4 key dimensions to consider. And and these booklets available in 4 dimensions provide the methods on how to deal with these different key aspects. Now, bro,
so just very final words about what's the next step. As you know, the next step is the workshop, the online workshop that we will have in 1 week's time on the 26th of January, 9:30 in the morning, Central European time. As you know, the task is defined as a sort of a cycle of starting with a diagnosis, an implementation, and a planning ahead phase. The diagnosis is kind of identifying, characterizing the different case studies that can be whatever you may want to reflect and identify. What are the strengths and weaknesses of each one? What are the bottlenecks to their development? What are the priorities? And what are the innovation objectives? And this phase has to take place in 2023 because the results will constitute a milestone which we'll have to deliver in December 2023. It is a full year that we can do, and we will discuss how to do it next Thursday all together. Then we'll have an implementation phase whether the dimension that will need to be improved or put in place will be worked on, and they will lead into a plan ahead phase, where we do some comparative analysis and ensure the success of things. Implementation, of course, we say to the bottom that it can actually start also in year one, because one of the options we may imagine, we will validate this next week, is that the diagnosis can take, if something is already in place, can take part just as trying to do something new immediately and see what happens in the first year, then identify what needs to be improved and improve it in the second and third year. Okay. So the workshop next week will have as two, let's say, three main objectives. The first one is identify the case studies, the partner and the crop or crops that are targeted in an individual case study, to set the starting point of the case study in terms of the 4 dimensions, so the network, the design, the data, the finances. And for this, we will have and share with you immediately after a quick survey to complete. This will allow us to group case types. So, for example, there are going to be a group of case where there is no network in place and they will need to work on how to build the network, and another group of case which are very important financial worries, and we will need to invent a way to reduce the cost working on the design, for example. And so in this way, we will define together the approaches for this diagnosis and define together also a roadmap on which the ideal steps we will want to follow will be, and try to make sure they are going to be coordinated between all of us. Okay. So the take-home message is fill the survey that you see at this link. At latest, we will send it and paste it in the chat as well. At latest by Tuesday, 24th of January in the morning, so that we will have Wednesday to work on that and compile the results and see what comes out from what every one of you thinks proposes as a case to work on. And for now, I thank you very much for your attention, and we will open. We'll have still 20 minutes for a bit of discussion if you wish.